Good evening. Welcome to yet another event of CIC. And true to its spirit, we have brought you a different genre today. It's on traditional games and the lessons they teach us. And to take us through this very interesting topic, we have Vinitha Sidhartha. She has a degree in journalism and communication from the University of Texas at Austin. Returned to India in 1990 to set up her own communications consultancy under the name Master Page. After more than a decade working with corporate and media clients, Vinita decided to take a different path. Watching her grandmother babysit her children and teach them traditional games, she got her fascinated by the subject and started the brand Kreeda, an organization to revive traditional games of India and has 28 games in the market. While the initial focus is mainly on documenting rules and retailing the game, over time, Vinita has begun to research traditional games, documenting their presence on the floors of temples and monuments. She has worked with numerous special interest groups to understand the importance of traditional games in areas such as early childhood education, special education, learning mathematics, training and development through life skills, and much, much more. She has spearheaded numerous exciting initiatives to popularize traditional games, to build awareness about them, and to re-look at the way we play. She has published numerous papers on the subject, is a columnist with the New Indian Express, and is the author of the book Just Play: Life Lessons from Traditional Games. In addition to Kreeda, Vinita has worked for many years in the development sector, using her communication skills with leading international and local NGOs in issues such as HIV/AIDS, domestic child labor, child trafficking, open defecation, and many, many more. She is also a director in the Power Center, one of Microsoft's largest partners, where she handles the HR and marketing portfolios. She loves to write and shares her stories and poems on her blog. So, without further ado, I'd request Vinita to take her place on the stage and be ready for an hour of. Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to be here, and I'm always excited to talk about the work I do with traditional games. It's like these young mothers, they can never stop talking about their children. Except I've been a young mother for the last 22 years working on this, and I'm still excited to talk about Kreeda. I'm not so excited to talk about my boys who are grown up, but Kreeda has been my eternal baby. And I think today's talk, before I get into the actual theme of today's talk, because I always have new people in the audience who don't know the background, I am going to touch a little bit on different things that I've done with why games and things like that. So if you have any questions, we'll address them at the end. I hereby describe the organization, structure, and rules of this ancient Shastra. The reason being that scholars do not study them. In this book, there is a description of several board games. The intention of the Shastra being that people will enhance their brain power by studying them. Hari Krishna, son of Venkatram, wrote this in 1793. More than 200 years later, I'm still wishing that people will study this ancient Shastra of traditional games. And I hope with my efforts and the efforts of everyone in this room, we won't have to make the same impassioned plea in another 200 years. So, why did I start researching traditional games? And the eternal question, what made me do it? So, my grandmother used to babysit my children. This is their great grandmother and an 80-year age gap. It's hard enough to bridge the gap of one generation. But when we have to bridge the gap of three generations, it's very, very difficult. Yet the kids loved going and visiting my great grandmother because she played with them. She always had time to play. Their grandparents, sadly, were not in Chennai, and the great grandparents were eternally ready to play. I was charmed by how wonderfully these games bridged this 80-year age gap. And I thought to myself that one day, Even when I'm a great grandmother, I probably won't know any of these old games to pass them on. And that's where this whole journey started. The simple desire to ensure that these games are preserved for future generations. So when I started, it was about creating games, not just reviving the games or documenting the rules, but also ensuring that they reflected the whole spirit of traditional play. You know, there was no point in making games with plastic pieces and, modern feel or touch. So that was a very important thing for me. And with the kind of upbringing I had, I didn't know that much about tradition. Yes, it was a traditional home, but I didn't visit temples every day. I didn't know, hadn't read a lot about our culture. Yeah, like every child had grown up knowing the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and the buck stopped there. So it meant a deep delve into many, many aspects of our history, our culture, our heritage, our environment, and much, much more to get to where I was today. And that's the thing with games. The more you read, the more you realize they're intertwined with everything. And to understand, truly understand games, you have to study a whole range of subjects before you get there. And every time, just when I feel, okay, I think I know what I'm talking about, something new will open up, and I'm staggered by how much I don't know. And sadly, there is no one who does know, which means I'm left with the challenge of where do I get this information from? Yes, like Hari Krishna, there are a few books which you can read, but they don't go into a deep delve on games. So you're kind of groping around, working with different people with different special interests. One like Pradeep Chakravarti sitting right here, one of the people I've collaborated with, and many, many more, to understand more and more about traditional games, their depth, their history, their background, and why are they relevant today. I recently did a very interesting exercise of talking to a number of people about their memories of play, and this one stood out to me. My remembrance is that 60, 70 years ago, much of the recreation and fun was within large, undivided families. Games that were popular were Dai Katam. The katam was drawn on the ground, competition was fierce and noisy, participation cut across generations, and sometimes neighbors would join in. Others would be active spectators encouraging one side or the other. Over weekends, this would be a long session extending to a good 4 to 5 hours. I'd like you all to examine your lives and see when last have you spent 4 to 5 hours just playing? It's a rare thing today, even for children. Children are hustled off from the rigors of a classroom to, structured gameplay in classes. Your child plays a good game of chess, he goes for chess class. He plays a good game of cricket, and he's, you know, the budding Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli, and hustled off to chess class. We don't have time for free play. And when I talk about games, most people say, oh, we will call children. But this is not for children. In the past generations, everybody played, grandparents, aunts, uncles, everyone. And we as adults have forgotten how to play. Why? The breakdown of the joint family. With fewer people in the household, with both working parents, time has become a constraint. Rising media penetration. Everything is on television. Family time now is television time. A movie, and of course, let's not talk about OTT. We're all guilty of it. It's not like I'm any different. It's the easiest thing is to go veg out in front of the TV and watch whatever show is there. And that's what we all do. But the fact remains that psychologists across the world have talked about the importance of shared experiences. What's the difference between a shared experience and a common experience? You're all sitting here listening to me talk. My mother is here, my cousin is here. They're both sitting here, and each one is enjoying my speech in their own way. This is a common experience. They're both here, each one is on their own. But if they were to play a game, it becomes a shared experience because the experience you share is defined by the person with whom you are enjoying it. When you're watching something, the person next to you doesn't matter. It's what's on stage that matters or what's on screen that matters. So, the way I would play a game with my mother, as against way I'd play with my child, particularly if he's young, I'd probably let him win. As against probably how I'd play with my husband, where I'd be desperate to, make sure he loses and do anything to make sure he loses, is what makes for a shared experience. And psychologists have found that shared experiences build better relationships. So when we are sitting at home and watching a movie with our child, we are having what's a common experience. Or we are sitting with our wives or husbands and watching a movie. It's a common experience. We're not sharing anything. And that's what builds relationships. And in a world gone mad where relationships are becoming harder and harder to keep, perhaps we need more of these shared experiences. Traditional games are dying. Why? Because they're all part of the oral tradition. Nobody wrote down the rules. They were passed down, shared, modified, adapted as they went along. Game boards were drawn on the floor with a stick or with a chalk piece. We have a few surviving engravings on the floors of temples and monuments, which I will show you later. And that's probably the only evidence we have of specific games that have been played. Otherwise, we run the risk of losing them forever. India is very proud to have a fantastic culture of traditional games. We have games of every genre. We have race games, we have cross and circle games, we have games of alignment, we have hunt games, we have blocking games, we have games of distribution. I can go on and on and on. And in every type and genre, we have a number of them to choose from based on your preference, your level of competence, and much, much more. And yet, we are in danger of losing those games. So that's why we're all here today to talk about the games. Yes, they're old. Yes, we are in danger of losing them. But are they relevant? Does it matter what happens if I lose my games? I'll do something else. Why should I preserve my games? My research in the last 15 years, when I started, it was more, as I said, about documenting the games that you find in temples and monuments. But in the last 15 years or so, I've started focusing more and more on why games. And I've worked with numerous special interest groups, from special needs children to burn victims in an NGO, to corporate training, to mathematics. In fact, I was in Madurai last week presenting for CBSE principals how traditional games can be used in teaching mathematics, and much, much more. But in the midst of all of that, there are some numerous fabulous lessons for each and every one of us. So I can say, oh, my child's grown up, I don't need mathematics, so why play traditional games at all? But there is a lesson in it for everyone. And this was the subject of my research in the few years before COVID and led to my book, Just Play, published by Rupa. Traditional games provide the opportunity for players to assimilate a variety of scenarios and adapt to them. Do we have any computer gamers here? Online gamers? No? So, in the online gaming community, they've used a phrase called the magic circle. The magic circle is the space where you suspend the reality of the world so that you can immerse yourself in the reality of the game. This doesn't just apply for traditional games, it applies everywhere. It applies in Adupuliyatam or Palanguri or Daikatam or Paramapadam or anything that you play. Because for that brief moment, you're living in the game. And through the game, you are able to learn things that you can't do in real life. Mistakes in real life are very expensive. If you make a mistake in your thinking or your strategy in a game, it's okay. You just play the game again. And it's sometimes fun to rethink and do it again completely differently. You can try an aggressive strategy. You can try a defensive strategy. You can do so many different things. You can try moving your game pieces differently. And every game has that element in it. Dealing with stress. When I was growing up, I don't think I'd even heard of the word called stress till I went to college or maybe beyond that. Now you have tiny little kids, fifth standard, sixth standard, saying, I'm very stressed. Everyone is stressed. And one of the best things to deal with stress is laughter. And I can assure you, even now, if you watched outside, a group of people were playing and they were laughing as they played. You can't help playing. Yes, there are things called laughter clubs and much, much more. But that's canned laughter. I think someone's trying to get in. That's canned laughter. This is something that comes naturally. And stress definitely is something. And this was reflected by King Alfonso X of Castile. So traditional games are not just from India, they're from all over the world. And he wrote this book in 1066, 1266, called the Book of Games. He said, because God wanted that man have every manner of happiness in himself naturally, so he could suffer the cares and troubles when they came to them. Therefore, men sought out many ways that they could have this happiness completely. Wherefore, they found and made many types of play and pieces with which to delight themselves. I don't think I could have said it better. Suffering the cares and troubles of the world. And if I can play games to deal with it, why not? So, the first thing you learn when you get into the games is understanding yourself. When we talk about the journey of what do I learn through traditional games, you learn to understand yourself. Now, many of the games can teach you the same things, but I've picked a few games just to showcase them to you. Any self development makes for introspection. You need to examine oneself, rethink, and reinvent oneself. And I cannot think of a better game than the punch cone. I think a few of you were playing outside, and there are two versions to the game, and it's a solitaire game. It's one of the there are a whole range of solitaire games, and unlike your card solitaire, which is pure chance, this is something that requires you to strategize and improve on what you do. The simpler version is a bit like your brain vita, but the more complex version is definitely more complex. And I was telling Hari here, when I first learned that game, it would haunt me in the night. I'd go to sleep thinking about it, wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it, till I could fix it. And every time I'm like, oh man, why did I do this? Why don't I try something else? So you reinvent until you get it. And no, if you want to go out and try it, I'm not going to tell you the solution. You're going to have to figure it out for yourself. Be haunted yourself through a few sleepless nights to figure it out. The beauty of this game is it's played on a five-pointed star. And I'm sure all of you will remember as little children drawing the five-pointed star. And the lovely thing about it is, and if you remember, we used to do this as kids, you can do it without lifting your pencil from the book again and again and again and again. So, the clue I will give you, and Pradeep knows this, that in every end there is a beginning, and in every beginning there is an end. That's the beauty of how you draw the star, and within that lies the clue to the game itself. So, some time ago, Pradeep Chakravarti and I were doing a talk, and we talked of these three pillars: strategy, synergy, and survival. I didn't know he was going to be here today, but I'm basing today's talk on these three pillars: strategy, synergy, and survival. So, when you think about it, everything in life is built on these three pillars. Whether you're navigating a corporate environment, whether you're navigating the challenges of an educational system, or whether it's even interpersonal relationships within a home, dealing with in laws or children or whatever it may be, strategy, synergy, and survival. So, we have this game called Ashta Chema. The very fascinating thing about this game, And this is perhaps one of the few games in India. The version we have here is the one that's played in Andhra and Telangana. But this is perhaps one of the few games in India which are played exactly the same way across the country. Most games you will find have variations. And what's interesting is you'll find the same game played on different types of boards with varying number of game pieces, with different types of dice, with different types of rules, or the same board with different rules. So you see so many variations. But this is one game that I've realized is perhaps played almost the same way in every part of the country. And one rule that is there in this version and is there everywhere, so, is that you have to cut a player to move to the next stage. Unlike the more complex die katam or the crossboard, it's a small area to traverse before you move to the inner layer. So it is sometimes possible for you to not have to cut a player to move on. And that's what makes this game so complex. Because what you do is you end up circling and circling until you cut a game piece. So you may be very lucky, you may throw the dice, you may skip everything, you may not get cut yourself. But if you don't end up by chance landing on someone to cut them, you have to circle the board again and again until you go to the next level. And that's what makes this game very interesting because you play with cowrie shells, and a throw of the 8 on the cowrie can take you more than halfway around the board in just one throw. So it's very easy to miss your opponent. But you still have to. You have to take that decisive action of cutting your opponent. I know there are people who feel that this concept, in fact, I met a school group where they said, oh, we want to play the games without cutting and killing and encouraging violence. One looks at cutting and killing as violence, yes. But it's about a decisive act, and in everything, there are obstacles to be overcome. You need to look at this metaphorically. You're not cutting a human being, you're overcoming an obstacle to be able to get to the next level. And that is what makes this game so fascinating. So I've watched a game where two people have circled the board at least 3, 4 times before they can cut someone and move into the next level. And that's what makes this game very, very fascinating. This is a game of Sola CD. Sola CD is a battlefield game where each one has 16 or 18 game pieces, even. Uh, what's interesting with the 18-piece version is you start the game with just a single empty space. Okay? So, when you, I assume you've all played chess here. So, sometimes you can make a couple of moves, kind of get a feel of your opponent before you have to plunge into the game, right? Solar CD, when you play, you don't have that time. So you either have 5 empty spaces, which is difficult enough, or one. So you have to go from the first move. You don't have time to suss out your opponent. Oh, is this guy going to make mistakes? Is he a defensive player? Is he an offensive player? How am I going to do this? You have to get going from the first move. Much like, you take up a new job, they're expecting to perform from day one. You don't have time to figure out what kind of boss you have. Can I do this? You're expected to perform, especially when you're recruited at the senior level. And there are many, many moves you make. It's tiny moves. And the thing with Solar CD is you can lose almost everything and still win the game. You can lose almost all the game pieces, but still win the game. It's a question of not how much you lose, but how much you overcome. And that's what makes it different from many other games. I can lose everything. Unlike chess, I lose my queen. My God, that's here every game piece is equal. I can win the game with a single game piece. So it doesn't matter what I've lost. What matters is what I've overcome. And just as a corollary, this morning I work with an NGO that supports children with HIV. I run an NGO. And today was our 15th anniversary. And I was thinking about this game when I woke up this morning because we were celebrating today 163 children with HIV below the poverty line who have graduated with our support. And almost all of them were infected at birth, which means they have lost their parents in many cases. They've been shunned by family, thrown out by their own relatives. They can't talk about their status to their best friends or neighbors, and sometimes even within the extended family. And yet, they survive. They've lost a lot. It's not what they've lost that we celebrate, it's what they've overcome to get where they are today. And that's the lesson in the game. And I think all of us see ourselves sometimes in that situation where we lose a lot. But if we can overcome, one can still win the game. The third is the game of Kattam Vilayata, and most of these games are outside. So please, at the end of the session, you can go try them out. My colleague Rukmini or I will be here to help. The game of Kattam Vilayata, you've all played knots and crosses or tic-tac-toe or X's and zeros, whatever you called it. And typically you'll find the game, if both players are evenly matched, it'll end in a draw. India has a whole range of games of alignment, each one more complex than the other. We have 3 in a row games, and this one is a 4 in a row game. And it's a very interesting game because you cannot end in a draw. You have to play it to conclusion. So you start the game much like tic-tac-toe, placing your game pieces. And you're thinking in a very proactive manner, okay, I'm going to place my game pieces here. And somewhere along the way, I'm going to make my 4 in a row. And then your opponent starts moving. You're no longer thinking proactively, but you're thinking reactively. You're responding to your opponent's moves. And that's what makes this game very interesting. Because in life, we find ourselves doing both, thinking proactively and sometimes having to react to situations or people or the actions of people. And we still have to be able to survive, figure out our strategy, and move on. We come to the second pillar, synergy. We have, in the corporate world, tamed this down to teamwork. Everything is about teamwork. Are you a team player? I think this question gets asked everywhere. Teamwork. There's so much more than just teamwork. Synergies are about so much more than just teamwork. It's about aligning so many things, not just with people, aligning our hopes, our plans, our ambitions, our skills, and much, much more. But perhaps my favorite game of all, if I have to pick a favorite, it's very hard. It's like being asked, who's your favorite child? Many people ask me, what's your favorite game? And if I had to pick one, I was forced at gunpoint to pick one, I would pick Adapuliatam, and I'll tell you why. The game of Adapuliatam is what we call a hunt game, and it's an asymmetric game. We have 3 tigers on one side and 15 goats on the other side. That's a rarity. You rarely have two opponents who have a varying number of game pieces. That rarely happens. Chess, 8 and 8. Most games, equal number of game pieces. Two, the movements of the tigers and the goats are different. The tiger can kill by jumping over a goat. The goats can never jump at all. Again, different. You may say, but in chess, different game pieces have different moves. Yes, but every piece of yours has a mirror in mind. It's very rare that opponents have different moves. Three, the goal of the tigers is to kill the goats. And the goal of the goats is to surround the tigers so they cannot move. So you have this strange game, completely, the opponents have different number of game pieces, the opponents have different types of moves, and they have different goals. Yet, it's a strategy game. We call this in our parlance a hunt game because the tigers are literally hunting the goats. So, what makes this game very interesting? Okay, quick show of hands. Who thinks that the tiger would win easily? Lift your hands. Come on, guys. Okay. How many think the goats will win easily? Some of you. Okay, not bad. We have a fairly equal audience. Okay. So, very interesting. Yes, it is balanced depending on your moves. So, many people, when I ask them to play, they'll say, I'll be the tiger immediately. Personally, I find it easier to win as a goat than a tiger. But everyone, your new player will say, I'll be the tiger because you see the tiger as aggressive, as someone who would win more easily. And that's a reflection of the way we think. We assume the hunter, the aggressor, is likely to be a winner, but not true. And what makes this game interesting is, so let's say there is a goat and there's a tiger and there's an empty space beyond the goat. The tiger has to jump over the goat to kill it. So another goat has to move in quickly and fill that space. This is not teamwork. Teamwork is when everybody does something together. This is protecting your community. Each goat protects the community of goats. And that is what is so different. So when you look at traditional games, you know the game of chess. There's still the fight going on as to whether chess came from China or India. And scholars will debate it, write papers about it. But I think the best argument I ever heard was so simple. India is the only country where elephants, camels, and horses are indigenous to the country. That seemed to settle it for me, but the scholars debate. But let's get back to that. You will find marble boards of chess, jade, silver, engraved. It was a game of kings and zamindars and princes. And in a game of chess, you could sacrifice a piece but still win the game. We've all done it. I'll sacrifice his bishop, then I can, get his queen or whatever it is. It is a game where the good of the all is greater than the good of the individual. And that's how rulers think, how directors think, managing directors think. They have to look at the good of the company. If I have to lay off a few people to protect the company, that has to be my goal. But you'll never find jade boards of Adapuliatam anywhere. It's a peasant game rooted in the community. And the lesson there is for a community to thrive, each and every member of the community must be protected for us to be able to grow. I know many of you would have seen this WhatsApp forward or Facebook post about how these African children are given sweets, Ubuntu. They hold hands and go together to get the sweets. I don't know if you've done that, seen that. So it's been making the rounds for many, many years. But it's more than that. It's not just about holding hands and doing things together. It's about protecting each other. It's about putting yourself out to ensure that the other goat is protected. And that to me is the most vital lesson in Adapuliyatam. And in a world gone mad today, where we are discriminating on the million things, we find a million reasons not to support each other, whether it's caste, creed, religion, what is color of your skin, or whatever it is. I think this is a very, very vital lesson for us, that every member of the community, however weak, however disabled in any way, or however different in any way, needs to be protected for the community to thrive. And until then, communities cannot thrive. And the community could be your office, it could be your family, it could be your neighborhood, it could be your city, your country, the world. We need to define the community. We as people, that's not the role of our leaders. We as people define our community and how we live together. This is the game of Dadi. And there's a little bit interesting I must tell you about this game. And I will talk about it later. So remember this game if you can till the end. So I don't want to interrupt the flow of thought. So this is again, you remember I told you games of alignment, 3 in a row games, 4 in a row games. This is another very, very complex 3 in a row game. But here, you don't just make 3 in a row and say, ha, I win. You have to make multiple threes in a row. And for every 3 in a row that you make, you remove one of your opponent's game pieces. So you start off with 9 game pieces each. And every time you make 3 in a row, you remove one from your opponent until the opponent is down to just 2. This is our life. Synergies, friends. We say, oh, I'm moving to a new town. I have to start all over again making friends. Yeah, we have to. It doesn't get over with one move or one 3 in a row. Our synergies, or be it a organization where you're making strategic partnerships, you reinvent yourself again and again and again, creating different synergies. Or even within yourself, these are my goals, these are my skills, these are my capacities. Are they in synergy? I can want to be the managing director of the company if I don't have the capacity. No matter what I do, I'll never be there. So these kinds of synergies, again and again in our lives, happen multiple times for us to be able to succeed. And then the game of Palanguri. I'm sure all of you recognize the game. I can see smiles on many people in the audience. Here's a game we know, we recognize. Vinitha has been showing us all these strange games. We don't even know the names. But now here's something we recognize. You, anyone here who's not played Palanguri? Wow, we actually have a lot of people. My gosh. So please don't go home without playing a game of Palanguri. You have to do it outside. So the beauty of the game of Palanguri is you take a bunch of stones or shells or game pieces and you have to distribute them around the board. And you keep doing this, and somewhere along the way you'll hit an empty space. And the treasure after the empty space is yours to keep. Then your opponent plays, and back and forth till you exhaust all the game pieces on the board. So sometimes I can get one game piece's treasure in my first move and 2 in my second. But wow, I can hit the jackpot in my third or fourth move and get 40 and still win. And that's what makes Palanguri difficult and different. I can't say, hey, I got 40 now, or I make 15 in my first move. I'm like, all charge. And then I don't make even 1 or 2 in my next moves. So it's about cumulative efforts. It's not one effort or one thing. It's you keep doing it till the game is over and then decide who the winner is. It's a delightful game. It's incredible for your mathematical counting. My grandmother used to play with my children, I think till she was 96, a few months before she died. And I swear to you, she never lost. Now, I always believed that she was fantastic at it. But a little while ago, when I was interviewing a lot of people about the games they played, couple of them said the same thing. My grandmother always won. So someone said maybe those grandparents were cheating. I don't know. Were they cheating or were they brilliant? I don't know, but she never lost a game. And she'd have this impish smile when she knew she'd win. And she was superb. She'd look at the board, she'd know where to start, tuck, 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 and she would win. It was absolutely fantastic, the native intelligence that came into how she did it. Okay, we've talked about strategy, we've talked about synergy. Let's talk about survival. We need to survive. Sometimes it's only about survival. You have to get through COVID. You have to get through the economic meltdown. You have to get through a crisis at home. We have to survive. Life throws us into situations where we just have to survive. The bumbaram. Please tell me you've all played with the bumbaram. So anyone who's never played with the top here? Okay, good audience. I was beginning to get worried when I had so many people who never played the palanguri. Okay, you've never played?
I played, I could not get it.
That's okay. Not getting it is okay so long as you've played it.
I throw it and somehow it goes.
It goes. Does it go upside down? Because a lot of people have that problem where it'll spin upside down. It's about the flick of the wrist. Anyway, so the beauty of the bambaram, and I don't know how many of you know this. Okay, let me ask you this. No, it's not on the board. So you can't cheat. Does anyone know what's special about how the bambaram spins? Okay, that's science. Okay, there's something, lot of things. What makes the bambaram very unique in the way it spins? Yeah. Okay. Gyroscope. I'm getting a lot of good answers. Do you know that even if the surface is slanting, the bambaram will spin straight? Actually, when you say it, you're like, yeah, actually, that's true. But when you think about it, that's so cool. Imagine a slanting surface and the bambaram is always straight. I think that's exceedingly cool, right? I find that very, very cool. When I read that for the first time, like, really? And we went tried it out. Like, yeah, that's so cool, man. It's actually spinning straight. To me, that's incredible. Many of you have read about, the lotus and how the lotus emerges from the mud around it and still blooms. And, we need to be like a lotus overcoming whatever there is. And it's the same lesson in the Bambara. No matter what, I can spin, literally defying the odds, defying gravity, defying everything. You can spin straight, untouched, as it were, by the elements. And to me, truly, truly a lesson in survival. Of course, we have to get the throw right. Otherwise, that doesn't help. So it's all about survival. The game of Dai Katam. How many of you are Chaupad, or do we have anyone from Karnataka here? Pagade? No? Okay. So Dai Katam, Chaupad, Shokatan, so many names for this fantastic game. Has anyone here never heard of this game? Never heard of it? Never seen the board? Wow. We really need to get you down to Kreeda and get you fully engrossed in all our games. So this game is, yeah, I'm hearing someone whispering Ludo. This is the great grandfather of Ludo. And Ludo came from here. And look at the tragedy. We all know Ludo. Kids all over the world have played Ludo. And many of them don't know this game. When I was growing up and I used to play Ludo, and you may remember, we could never move in pairs, could we? No. Today, Ludo is taking on all the rules of Dai Katam. In Dai Katam, you can move in pairs. Have any of you heard of this rule? So you can actually move two game pieces together, but you have to throw an even number and move half the distance. And a pair can only be cut by another pair. Okay? A single cannot cut a pair. Very fascinating rules. There's yet another lovely rule which I discovered. You finish the game, you go right in, your coin has gone in, it's gone home. How many of you know it can come out again? Yes, it can come out again as a ghost. And the ghost travels in the opposite direction, can kill on a cross, can kill a pair. No rules apply. The ghost can only be stopped by another ghost. It's mayhem on the board when you play it like that. You literally decide, I'm going to come out and mess up everybody's life. That's what the ghost does. I'm going to come out and mess up everyone's life. Isn't that what COVID did to us? That's the ghost in our life of Daikatam. So that's there were so many complex rules built into it. And I have many people who come and say, no, no, I don't want that. That's a game of chance. But to me, if there is any game in the world that resembles life, it's Chopad or Daikatam or Shokatan, call it what you will. It's an interplay of choice and chance. No, it's a dice game. This is a game that people believe that Yudhishthira played in the Mahabharata. Okay, so let me tell you, nowhere in the Mahabharata do they actually describe the board or the rules of the game. They talk about the throw of the dice. What we have is artistic renderings of the games they played. We don't know if it was this game. I'm guessing not, because if you read the Mahabharata, it reads, Shakuni threw the dice and he said, you lost. You don't play this game like that. You don't lose at the throw of the dice. That's not the way the game is described. So to me, no, it's not the game in the Mahabharata. But there are other stories that Shiva and Parvati played this game. Again, we don't know. We know they played dice. And I'll come to that in a minute and tell you a story about that. But we do know that Emperor Akbar played on a huge marble court in Fatehpur Sikri. Anyone has seen this court? In Fatehpur Sikri, it's a huge marble court. And the story goes from accounts of travelers that women from his harem, dressed in different colors, moved on the board in place of game pieces. Just picture that night, oil lit lamps, incense in the air, the smell of jasmine, the tinkle of anklets, and Akbar throwing the dice, the imperial dice, and women moving on the harem. Sounds like something they should have put in the movies. And this is what we do know. We don't know if Shiva Parvati played this game. We don't know if this game was played in the Mahabharata. We do know they played dice. But why do I think this is such a fabulous game? Because it's an interplay of choice and chance. We have many choices. Which game piece do I move? Do I play a defensive game or an offensive game? Do I move in pairs, therefore move slower but stronger? Or do I break up my pair? Do I start with a pair, overcome a hurdle, and then break it up? Do I play to win or do I play to stop my opponent from winning? What's my goal? All this is in my hands. And this is true of life. And then, of course, there is chance. Life itself is an interplay of choice and chance. Why do we believe games would be any different? I'm going to ask you all to do an exercise. So, imagine you're playing this game. If you're not familiar with this, think of a game of Ludo. It's okay. Imagine there were no dice. Nobody can kill you. You can move any game piece any number of places you want. Does it sound like an interesting game? Boring. Yet we complain when life we have obstacles and chance plays with us. Imagine how boring life would be if we didn't have all of this to keep us excited, entertained. So that's my game of Chopad for you. Gilli Danda. Please tell me, some of you have played Gilli Danda. Yeah, a few hands. So when you played Gilli Danda and never played Chopad, you were evidently an outdoor person. So when you play Gilli Danda, you actually have to estimate how far you will hit the gilli, right? You can't overestimate or underestimate. What do you do, sir, in your profession? Okay, you work in a company? Yeah. Do you have goals? End of the year, do you have targets? Isn't that the game of Gilly Danda? Setting goals, setting targets. You can't overestimate your targets, can't underestimate. There is a game of Gilly Danda for you and your team to play. So that's the game of Gilly Danda. And then life is a journey. Learning to cope is a lifelong process. The game of Paramapadam. S- What's this game called? Somebody? Oh, please don't say that. You make me cringe. Okay. So snakes and ladder originated in India. If you say snakes and ladder, I cry. So the game of snakes and ladder traditionally is. I know there are WhatsApp messages floating around how Jnanadev is supposed to have invented it in the 13th century. There is no evidence of it. Okay, there are hundreds of different versions of snakes and ladders or Paramapadam. It's called by many different names: Mokshapatam, Vaikuntapali, Jnanpat, Paramapadam. They all mean the same thing. It's a journey to moksha or Vaikunta or the highest place, whatever you choose to define it. And traditionally, every snake represented a vice and every ladder a virtue. And every snake was named from a character from Indian mythology. And I'll tell you something fascinating, which has always fascinated me about Indian mythology. You have characters like, say, Mahabali or even Ravana. People believe he's a Shiva Bhakta. And the only flaw, but he had a fatal flaw. We see the same thing. Any literature students here? One. Shakespeare's plays, we talk about the fatal flaw in his protagonists. It's not evil people, it's people with a fatal flaw. Essentially, what our epics and mythology teach us is no one is good or bad. We are all deeply flawed as individuals. It's up to us to overcome them and go higher and higher till we reach Paramapada. Overcome the vices, acquire virtues, and reach Paramapada. So, a little bit of history about this game. The British loved this game, and during the Victorian era, took it back to their country. And Queen Victoria, of course, had a very repressive society, changed all the vices, removed, the names of our mythology, made the virtues things like decency and modesty and all of that. And when she died, there was such a reaction to her repressive societal rules that they removed all of this and gave us back the game of snakes and ladders. Or more cringeworthy, you have shoots and ladders where they've taken out the snakes. Okay? Now, I had a snake lover, of course, come and tell me, oh, we're demonizing snakes. But I think we need to be a little more metaphorical about it. Sadly, every child in the world plays snakes and ladders. The phrase back to square one, which is such a part of the English language, comes from this fabulous game where you come down this huge snake and come down to the number one. And yet, nobody talks in India. We all call it snakes and ladders. None of us remember our traditional games. What a tragedy that is. So, why do I revive traditional games? Can you see the board? I don't know how clear this is with the lighting, but there is an Adapuliatam on the board. Can you see it? And right under that, can you see someone has actually put his name to it? So, we find these boards on the floors of temples and monuments. Pradeep has been with me, seen it. Sundari and husband, Hari, they've seen me in temples and monuments. I'm usually rolling on the floor looking for things. And what could have happened? Temple and monument building took years. It wasn't like they came today, finished. It's like L&T is building something. They have this place where all the workers stay. Same thing happened even in those days. And we suspect that these were etched on the floor during either building by the stonemasons, artisans, or during renovations. Some people have said stray visitors. I tend to doubt it because cutting into granite is not so easy. You need special tools. And while some could have been done by stray visitors, some of the boards I've seen are symmetrical, beautiful, deep cut. No, I couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. So, how? You don't walk into a temple with a hammer and chisel and try to carve something on the floor. So, I what I love about this is I like the way he's put his name at the bottom of the board. This is mine. We've all written our name on our cricket bat. This is my bat. Same kind of concept. This is the game of Dadi. And for those of us in Tamil Nadu, it's a very fascinating game because you'll find this on the floors of so many temples and monuments. But nobody here remembers the game or knows how to play it. You cross over into the Telangana border and everybody plays the game. What happened? Why did this game go out of fashion? We don't have answers. These are the kinds of questions I ask. I told you at the beginning, it takes me in so many different directions trying to figure out what is this. And the amount, this game particularly, more than any other game, I can talk for hours and hours on what I've learned through, what I've not learned through this game, the questions it's thrown up. Because you have to know so many different things to understand the history of our games. Daikatam, Sola CD, Katavilayattu, and this beautiful game, which you'll also find done on my sari, is a game of 48 squares at the Tiruvanmur temple. And what is interesting is I hadn't seen it anywhere else. So I've been doing some research on this game, trying to figure it out. And in the course of reading through numerous books, looking for picture books, and just one day stray look at something at Ellora Caves. I'm sorry, it's not a great photograph. I can't do better than this here. I found this board of Shiva Parvati playing dice, and what looks like a similar board. So just like Dadi, I started thinking, okay, maybe the origins of the game are from elsewhere. So I started digging deeper and deeper. And I think it's a bit like, you find little clues here and there and you pull it takes you somewhere else. You almost feel like a Sherlock Holmes trying to figure out what's the answer to the puzzle. And I'm hoping that by early next year, we should have the rules in place to be able to play this game. But I made another very surprising discovery, and I'm showing you this photograph. You can see right where the rock touches the floor, something white. Can you see it? We dust column out to make it clearer. And there, under the rock, I a little ahead of it, you can see the game of Nadi. But under the rock, I can see part of a game, which means the game was carved there before the rock even came there. From the little we know, the rock has been there since the 11th, 12th century. Now, is the game older than that? And from what I can see, I suspect it's the same game of 48 squares, which gives us a suggestion of how old these games are. And if we have such an old and ancient tradition with so much to learn from them, isn't it the job of each and every one of us to do everything in our power to keep it alive, pass it on to future generations? I've been researching traditional games for over 22 years now. Thanks. When I started and I told people I was researching traditional games, people thought I was nuts. I really think many of them thought I had to be committed. And I'm sure many in my own family sitting here and are smiling thought the same thing. But today, I have an audience to listen to me talk about traditional games. I've done something right, but I can't do it all. So I'd request each and every one of you to support us in this venture, whether it's sharing stories of games you play. I have some lovely young ladies here who have promised to share their childhood memories with us and the games they played. or whether it's taking these games to schools, colleges, offices, what have you, uh, please do support this effort, because it's not for me, it's not for Kreeda, but if it's for our wonderful culture of games. Thank you very much. I'll take questions. Ah, I promised this gentleman I'd tell him a story, and no, that's fine. So I did promise you I'd tell you a story about. So dicing is as old as it was there even in the Vedas. The concept of playing with dice goes back in many cultures. It was a way to try to predict the future. Man thought if they could predict the way dice fell, they'll be able to predict the future. So knuckle bones, sheep knuckle bones, are very popularly used even in Egyptian history. So even in the Vedas, there's this beautiful poem called the Gambler's Lament. And one verse there says, "Go back to your home, your gambler, oh gambler. Your wife awaits you. Your cattle and your farm need tending." It's about a gambler who loses himself and how he can go back. Sadly, many people stop playing games like Dai Katam, saying, "Oh, it will lead to gambling or a fight in the family." That's human frailty. Let's not blame the game, because we are frail and incapable of controlling our emotions. But going on to Shiva Parvati, the story goes that Shiva and Parvati played many games of dice. And there's some beautiful, absolutely beautiful poems, love poems, far more beautiful than any Shakespearean sonnet, about how they wagered kisses and embraces. And one of them goes, Parvati says, "I know I owe you 1,000 kisses, you impatient man, but I have 100 days to repay them." And the Lord closed his eyes and opened his eyes. And with that, a day passed. So there's some absolutely fantastic stories. There's one story where Shiva and Parvati play dice, and Parvati wins, and Shiva loses everything, his damru, everything. So he goes to Lord Vishnu and complains, saying, "I don't know what to do." And Vishnu comes and says, "You challenge her to another game of dice." And Vishnu takes the form of dice, and Shiva wins. And there is a corollary to that story. Of course, a lot of it is mythology, legend. But I love this. I love these stories. It makes the game so fascinating. So apparently, Shiva then tells Parvati. I mean, like any husband and wife, forget gods, goddesses, it's almost like husband and wife bickering. So Shiva tells Parvati, "Oh, it wasn't you that won. It's Lord Vishnu. He was the dice. So, what you didn't matter." So Parvati decides to go on strike. She just stops. And Parvati is Shakti. She embodies the world. The world, I mean, plants dried up, rain stopped, everything went wrong. And then Shiva goes and apologizes to her, makes up. Maybe they played for embraces and kisses again. I love these stories. They make them so human, so charming almost. So that's the story of Shiva and Parvati I promised to tell you. There's many more, but in the interest of other questions. Anyone else?
But one of the versions I understood is the game of dice. It represents what happened during the Vienna Convention in 1926.
The game of dice goes way before the Vienna Convention. Let's focus. These are games as old as hundreds and hundreds of years. So, yes, I don't think.
Thank you, ma'am. Lovely talk.
Thank you.
Got a lot of throwbacks way back when I was living in the villages. Two questions, ma'am. One, when you were talking about the game of dice, something struck. And especially when we play the Western version of the games, we use the cube dice, in which we have 6 numbers. But when we play Dayakat at home, we don't use the cube dice. We use the cuboid dice,
Yes.
in which one side is empty. And my mother, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but she taught me that the empty side means 12.
Two empties are 12.
two empties are 12 exactly, and only I think four வரைக்கும் தான் இருக்கும்னு நினைக்கிறேன்.
It'll be 0, 1, 2.
1 2 3 and then there will be the empty side. What is the story of this? That is one. Second is that when you wrote the Paramapadam, I noticed the green and red things on the boxes. Is there a different version of Paramapadam, or is that how it is?
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me answer your second question first.
Yes, thank you.
The first answer is a little longer. The green and red is just a visual thing. When I started researching the Paramapadam, I found many, many, many versions of it. So, what we have is an amalgam of a different a lot of versions, because literally every community had their own Paramapadam. I at one point had collected almost 40 old Paramapadams on paper. Sadly, in the 2015 floods, I lost them all. I hadn't scanned them at that time. I have one that survives, and I mean, I literally am scared to breathe near it. We have scanned it, but So, what we have is an amalgam of various Paramapadams. We've also made some, let me say, we've made it. And see, many of the older village versions sometimes had names that were popular in that community, and we suspect even village deities. So we've tried to make it a little more universal to understand by using the concepts from different boards. So that is a color scheme. That's it. As far as the dice is concerned, how many of you think the square dice is a Western dice? Yeah. Yeah, no, it's not. Indus Valley civilization excavations have found the cuboid dice. And interestingly, the same numbering as what we play today. And how many of you know the fact that opposite sides add up to 7? So it's 1 and 6, 2 and 5, 3 and 4. That's how the dice are. But what has been found in the Indus Valley, you have the same thing, but you also have different numbering systems. And I think even in Kiredi, they found a dice like that. I'm trying to get to know more about the numbering system. Sorry, just one more answer to him before I come to you. The numbering on the long dice, 0, 1, 2, 3, is what we play with here. There are different types of numbering on long dice in different parts of the country. And there are other types of dice. Cowrie shells are used as dice. Bamboo sticks are used as dice. And interestingly, it's much like your binary system. Someone works in IT here. Okay, IT. So your binary zeros and ones. So you had, your bamboo sticks and cowrie shells used as dice. Sorry, I think you had a question. Sorry.
Comparing traditional games between India and outside, have you found anything? I'm sure you have lots of stories. Anything you'd like to recall, or the contrast?
Okay. Actually, there's less to contrast and more to compare. So take an example of a black and white checkered floor. Okay. You put a bunch of kids in that room, leave them, come back after half an hour. What will happen? They'll come up with a bunch of games, hop from this square to that, don't step on this. The beauty of traditional games is it's human nature that's embodied in traditional games. All games reflect something. Monopoly, born of, the building infrastructure boom. A lot of IT games today just born of a deep desire to escape this world of stress, right? Traditional games were rooted in far more human feelings, and you'll find there are similarities to games across the world. And what is interesting is similarities to the boards themselves. So your die katam, I see a similar board in South America. Now, could it be that the game, there was trade between them and it was exchanged? Or could it be familiar grids? For example, a star is a very familiar thing, or a three squares is a very familiar kind of grid. So, did people respond the same way? But you'll also find, even in India, on the same board, they'll play a different game in the south, and in a different part of the country, on exactly the same board, they play a different game. And very often it's guesswork. Did they play this game here or that game here? So there are many, many similarities across the world. And yeah, it is a deep, deep subject of study to see how games were exchanged. Africa and India have a lot of similarities. During the chess Olympiad, I had showcased our games, and we had people from various countries coming and sharing stories about how they played similar games in their countries. But Africa, parts of Africa were on the trade route, Silk Route, so quite likely a long trade. South America seems a little more far fetched, but we don't know. We don't know enough to comment. There are books that have been written about how there was trade with South America many years ago. I don't know enough. I'm not a historian. I don't know enough to comment. And as I said, I need to be an expert on a million fields before I can talk about games.
Hi, good evening. My name is Suresh Malya, and compliments to Vinitha
Thank you.
for a wonderful presentation and taking on the mic for almost an hour and 15 minutes without sipping. And it's not a question. If I'm allowed, I'm going to give you two suggestions in your
Sure.
pursuit of taking this, sharing this
Sure.
to the generation next.
Yes.
Number one, you may kindly take this to all the play schools where the formative years they may get inducted to this wonderful creative game without spending much money on gadgets and things like that. Number two, you can take it to IT companies because today they use the word buzzword stress, and the first place they hit is coffee shop or the gym, but they have a huge gymnasium with all the equipments, but you will find only the clothes are being dried there. Nobody goes there, but this does not need much of an investment. So if this could be brought in there, so people can do the de-stressing there at absolutely thing, which also brings in team value. I hope it is a value addition. You
What?
may think it call it as a think global or act local, or think local or act global. I leave it to you. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And I am doing both of these things. I do work with schools and not just IT companies, a lot of corporate organizations. And we do take the games to them. And if you are part of or know any organizations who would be interested, please do reach out to us.
Ma'am, I have a small
Once
question.
again.
Video games and computer games are taking the place of traditional games.
What? Let me finish with him and come back to you. Yeah.
This is regarding the Paramapadam.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that every snake is similar to some vice.
No, I said every snake is named for a character who represents a vice.
Vice. Could you please give some examples?
We have a snake called Kumbhakarna, who represents laziness. Bakasura, who represents greed. We have Mahabali, who represents arrogance or pride, and many, many more.
What is the one which brings you back to square one?
That's good question you asked. I was wondering if anyone would ask me that. It's Dakshaka. So I don't know how many of you remember. So I'm going to have to take 2 minutes. Do I have the time to tell the story? Okay. If you're tired of me, just tell me to shut up, because, once I start talking about games, I could go on for hours. So anytime you feel tired of me, tell me to shut up. So do you know the story of King Parikshit?
Yes.
So he is lost in the forest. He goes to the hermitage. He sees the sage meditating. The sage is on a Maunavrat. He asks the sage to his way back to the kingdom. But the sage has taken a vow of silence and doesn't respond. So he's angry, takes a dead snake and drapes it on the sage's neck. So he wanders off into the forest and ultimately finds his way back. So the sage's son returns and finds the snake draped on the sage and understands that the king has done this. So he curses the king, saying, "You will die bitten by a snake." So when Parikshit hears this, he protects himself, everything, locks himself in a room, much like we did during COVID. Don't let the virus come in, don't let the snake come in. But finally, Dakshaka disguises himself as a worm in a fruit, comes and kills the king. So the power of anger, whether it's on the part of King Parikshit or his son, and how it can destroy things, that is the biggest snake. And our ancients believed that that was probably the worst vice of all. I think many of us here will agree. I definitely will, because I have a huge temper. So I do understand that.
In Tamil, it is Kovam, no?
Uh,
What you're saying is
Go.
Kovam. The best example Valluvar has given is one which destroys oneself is Kobam. It's something like matchstick. You light
Yeah.
it, it will first destroy itself.
Yeah.
Then only it can destroy anything else.
Yep.
Anyway, out of that story you mentioned, we got the Bhagavatam because of that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. No, I'm good. Any other questions? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, video game. See, the thing is, I'm not against video games or computer games. Everyone assumes I'm against it. I just believe everything needs a balance. If I'm doing only one thing instead of many things, it's a problem. Whatever it is, even if I'm playing chess all the time or studying all the time, it's a problem. Everything in excess is a problem. So long as we're able to balance it out, I don't see why not.
Hello, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I don't have any specific questions. I just want to thank you because tomorrow we are going to Kanjipuram cluster. Like we are going to five panchayat community. We are engaging the students and the educational background. So education oriented things. So first time we are touching that traditional sports and these games like. ஸோ லாஸ்ட் வீக் வந்துட்டு நான் காஞ்சிபுரம் விழுப்புரம் போயிருந்தோம். ஸோ அங்கே வந்துட்டு இந்த மாதிரியான கேம்ஸ் நான் கண்டக்ட் பண்ணோம். ஸோ when I used to play the games around those children like 9th 10th and 11th students, நிறைய பேருக்கு இந்த கேம்ஸ் ஆர் அவேர்னஸ் இல்லை. ஸோ வி கான் த்ரூ லைக் ஸோ இதெல்லாம் நம்ம விளாண்டோம், இவங்களுக்கு இதெல்லாம் தெரியலையே அப்படின்ற மாதிரியான விஷயங்கள் இருந்துச்சு. ஸோ ஐ பர்சனலி டுக் லாட் ஆஃப் இன்புட்ஸ் ஃப்ரம் யுவர் presentations and your words.
Thank you so much.
I felt really like நாளைக்கு போகிற செஷனாக இருக்கட்டும், இதுக்கப்புறம் நாங்கள் கோ த்ரூ பண்ணுற செஷன்ஸ் என்டையர்லி we get a lot of things and we have to engage in our modules.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you ever need any support, please contact our office.
Yeah, sure.
We are there and we are happy to help.
Sure, ma'am. So personally, I want to ask like நீங்கள் சொன்ன மாதிரி இப்போ like school students நீங்கள் engage பண்ணுறீங்கன்னா what are the specific if anyone you gone through like personal experience அந்த மாதிரி?
So each school works differently. Some schools have a center in the school itself where children can play. Some schools have a heritage club where my colleague Rukmini goes, works with them once a week, teaches them the games. In some schools, we have actually trained the maths teachers to use the games in the classroom. So each school has a different model. So we customize it. It also a lot depends on how much the schools believe in it, how much the teachers believe in what we're doing. So we customize the models differently. And we're hoping that we can do more and more like this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Last question. Two people are standing. Two questions then. And then I'll be here. You can ask all your questions, please.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed your session. So I'm also like you. I started searching for the game and everything. So I found around 200 plus traditional games, and I made myself 400 plus board games. Just started my company. So I want to meet you.
Sure.
So we'll have a session.
Please.
Yeah. Thank
Please
you.
do.
So lovely session. Two things, right? One, how did you get to know these variations in these games? Are these part of the books you've referred to, or is it oral hand-me-down who's taught you this?
Primarily oral. Books very rarely give you detailed rules. Even Hari Krishna and all his wisdom who wanted us to play the games is very, very vague when it comes to rules. So that's a fairly major problem, you know. So primarily oral tradition, but even oral tradition, we end up with a few gaps. So we do a lot of testing in the office. And sometimes if we see gaps, we try to talk to people. Sometimes we're not able to plug it in, but we look at other similar games and try to use rules to plug gaps.
And the variations, how did you get to know?
Again, same way. It's always oral tradition.
Thanks. And one exciting takeaway from me is I'm going to come back as a ghost.
Thank you. So thank you, everyone. I think officially we'll call this to an end. But anyone who wants to ask questions, I'll be here. Thank you for being a wonderful and participative audience. And as I said, it always gives me great pleasure to talk about my games. Thank you. And thank you, of course, Mr. Mauli, Sabri, and the Chennai International Center.
Thank you very much, Vinitha, for that fascinating talk. Wish we had known this when we were asked not to play. I could have told them that, I'm doing doing strategy, I'm doing synergy, and I'm going to survive in the world because of this. So, anyway, thanks a lot. And I think the audience will carry your message forward. And I'm sure we'll also support you in your journey to bring back these traditional games and to revive this in our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just some housekeeping announcements. Next program is on the 9th of November, and we have creating 10 million jobs in 2 decades. So, this is a very fascinating. Kalpana Shankar, she runs an NGO, and they've been creating these jobs. And I'm sure many of you who are volunteering would like to listen to her on how they have been creating jobs over, whether it's in rural areas or in urban areas. So please do come on the 9th. And as we are building up towards our literary festival, that is on the 14th of December, we have a number of eminent speakers coming in from across the country and even some international speakers. I'm sure you'll encourage us by being there too. Thank you very much for this. Thank you.